Now in this video I'll show you how to solve one-step equations, but not plus minus, but in this case times and divided by. So the actual rules are more or less the same. Remember, the aim was to have the polynomials, the unknown, be by itself on left hand or right hand side. Also, we want to make sure we find the inverse of whatever we're trying to move. So in this case, if we're trying to move 2 times x, well, times, what's the opposite of times? It's divided by. So if it's 2 times x, we'll divide both sides by that same number by 2. So we'll try to find the inverse of whatever we're trying to move, and then we're going to perform that inverse calculation on both sides. So if we're dividing by 2, we're going to divide by 2 by both sides. Now, one difference of what is with plus and minus compared to with times and divided by, remember with plus and minus we're trying to remove something. So for example, if we have 3, well, we'll do minus 3 to both sides. Why is that the case? Because plus 3 minus 3 is equal to 0, and that cancels out. So we try to make things equal to 0 so that they would cancel out. Now with plus and times divided by, we'll actually try to get things to be equal to 1, not to be equal to 0. So if it's equal to 0, that'd be bad, but if it's equal to 1, we're quite lucky. So we were trying to get something to be equal to 1. Why? Because 1, so for example 1x, so 1 times x, well 1x is the same as just x. So if we get it to 1, if we get 1x to be our final answer, well, 1x is the same as just x, and remember the aim was to get the polynomial to be by itself. So if you have 1x, that's the same as x. That's why we're trying to get it to be 1x and not 0x, because 0x means we would have no x left at all. Now, a rule you need to remember is anything divided by itself is equal to 1. So for example, 1 over 1, that's the same as 1 divided by 1, that's equal to 1. 2 over 2, or 3 over 3, or 4 over 4, well, anything divided by itself is always equal to 1. You're going to have to remember that because that's the rule, or that's how we're going to try to get something to be equal to 1 to be able to cancel it out. Alright, so here's some examples. We have our first multiplication one. So we have 2x equals 10. Remember, there was actually a times between the 2 and the x. So 2 times x equals 10. Now what do we do with that times? Remember, the rule was always find the opposite. So what's the opposite of times? It's going to be divided by. Right, so as we found our opposite already, I'm actually using fractions, but remember the fraction line is the same as your division, right? So if I use a fraction line, it means the same as division. So if I figured out, well, I want to move that 2 because I want to have the x by itself. That was the point of all of this. We want to get the x to be by itself. Well, if we have 2 times x, we'll do the opposite. We'll do divide both sides by that number, by 2. And remember, what we do to the left hand side, we also have to do the right hand side. So what was 2 divided by 2? Remember, we said anything divided by itself is 1. So now we have 1x, and 1x is the same as just x. So we can cancel that out. Now on the other side, well, we have left 10 divided by 2, because remember 10 over 2 is the same as 10 divided by 2. So what's 10 divided by 2? Well, it's going to be equal to 5. And that's your answer. X is equal to 5. And that's how we try to do it. Find the inverse, and then in this case, if it's times, we'll divide both sides by that inverse. Alright, so next example, 20 equals 5y. Remember, it doesn't matter if we want to have it be by itself on the left hand side or the right hand side. It works the same way either way. So at the moment we've got 20 equals 5 times y, because there's a times between the 5 and the y. How do you get rid of times? Again, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to do divided by. And why do we want to get rid of that 5? Because we want to get the y to be by itself. So if we have, at the moment we have 5 times y, well, if we could get that 5 to be away, gone, we'll get y to be by itself. So if it's 5 times y, we'll do the opposite. We'll divide both sides by 5. And why is that the case? Remember, 5 divided by 5 equals 1, and 1 times y is just y. So this crosses out, and we're left with just y on the right hand side. And what's 20 divided by 5? Well, that would equal to 4. So now we're left with 4 equals y, and then that's your answer. So that's what we're trying to aim for. So 4 equals y. Alright, so next one. 10x equals minus 100. Remember, the idea was we want to get the x to be by itself. Now we have a times in front. So 10 times x equals minus 100. Remember, if it's times, well, all we have to do is to do the opposite. We divide both sides by that same number, by 10. Now what is 10 divided by 10? Well, that's equal to 1. And 1 times x is just x, so we can cross that out. It's basically gone. and we're left with just x on the left hand side, so we have x is by itself. Now here's an important rule. What's minus 100 divided by 10? If we have a negative number and we divide it or times by a positive number, it stays a negative number. So minus 100 divided by 10 is minus 10. And that would be our answer, right? So just one tiny difference over the last one was just that we divided, we had division with a negative number. So the rule is positive number divided by negative number, or the other way around, stays negative. And then that's the answer for the first three. Now the next one, we'll do it the other way around. So we are left with, remember the idea was, we wanted to get the x here for this question. So the question was x over 2 equals 10. We want to get the x by itself. Well, to get x to be by itself, we need to cross it out. So we've got x over 2 equals 10. What's the difference? So this is over, means division. What's the opposite of division? That was times. So we're going to times both sides by that same number, right? Because we're trying to do the inverse. And why do we do the inverse? Well, what's 2 over 2, right? 2 divided by 2 is 1, which means we can cancel that out because 1 times x is just x. So left with just x on the left-hand side. And what's 10 times 2? Well, that's 20. So that would be our answer for that question. So the answer would be x equals 20. Alright, for the next one, remember here we have it on the right hand side, it doesn't matter, same procedure as per usual. We want to get the y to be by itself. At the moment we've got 20 equals y over 5. Now that y over 5, that means divided by 5. So what's the opposite of division? That was multiplication. So instead of dividing by 5, we can just multiply both sides by 5. And why is that helpful? Well, what's 5 over 5? That's just equal to 1. We've mentioned that's equal to 1. That crosses out because y equal times 1 is just y. So we're left with y on the right hand side. Oops, wrong color. We're left with y on the right hand side. And what is 5 times 20? Well, that would be 100. And then that should be our answer for the next one. How about the last one? So we've got x over 10 equals minus 100. Remember the idea behind this? We want to get x to be by itself. At the moment, we have not be by itself. We have it as x over 100 over 10, sorry, which means x divided by 10. So we can do the opposite. We can do timesing both sides by that same number. So we times both sides by 10. Why? Because 10 divided by 10 crosses out, that's equal to 1, and we're left with just x on the left hand side. Now this is important. Remember, a negative number times a positive number stays negative. So minus 100 times 10, it will be negative, and what's 100 times 10 is 1,000, so it'll be negative 1,000. Now that's really important to know that the rules when it comes to division and multiplication are very similar to the ones when it comes to addition and subtraction. Aim is always to get the polynomial to be by itself on one side, either left hand or right hand side. How to do that? Well, first we need to find the inverse of whatever we're trying to move, right? So 2x means 2 times x. We want to move that 2. If it's 2 times, we'll do the opposite, we'll do divide it, so we'll divide both sides by 2. Right? So if we are trying to move times, we'll do division. And if we're trying to move division, we'll do times. Those are your more important rules to remember. And again, also that if we do one calculation to one side, we'll do the same calculation to the other side as well. But that's what you need to remember for one-step equations involving division and times.